I brought with me a little white glove. And I'm going to take this little white glove and put it on my hand, and I'm going to create a puppet that's going to help me tell a story. And when I do this puppet, I need some eyes, like your eyes that are looking at me, but I have my eyes in my hand. I'll put those little eyes on my finger, like this, and then I will dress up those eyes, and I will make a special character just for my story. This is a very old story. It's called The Little Old Lady and the Vinegar Bottle, and I want to share it with you today. There was a big old bottle lying in the sand, and the cork had kind of opened up at the end. Inside of that bottle was all kinds of grumbling and moaning and griping. There was an old woman inside of that bottle, and that old woman said, "I don't know why I'm living in this bottle. It's a shame somebody like me has to live in this bottle. I think I deserve to live in a much better place. I would like to have a little white house out at the edge of a town. That's where I would like to live." And the fairy had come along and heard the old lady. And so the fairy said to her, "Well, tonight before you go to bed, if you'll turn around 3 times, you'll see what you will see." Well, the old lady didn't have anything to lose, so that night before she went to bed, she put on her long nightgown and her little nightcap, and she crawled into bed. And then she remembered what the fairy said. "Oh, I need to turn around 3 times." And so she jumped out, and she turned around once, twice, 3 times. And the next day when she woke up, oh my goodness, she was in a little white house. She jumped up and she could smell the roses that were outside, and there was a garden in the back. There were lavender curtains hanging by her window. She liked where she was living now. But the little old lady did not thank the fairy. And so the fairy left town, and the fairy went to the east, and the fairy went to the west, and the fairy went to the north, and the fairy went to the south, and the fairy left town for a while. The fairy had been gone for a while, and she wondered about that old lady. She thought, surely the old lady is happy now. And so she came back to town, and when she came back to town, she came to that little white house. And when she got to the window, she heard the old lady complaining. "Well, I don't know why I have to live in this dinky little white house at the edge of town. I'd like to be a lot closer to town. I need to live in a 2-story house. I need to live where I can go to the market, and it's easy for me to walk, and I deserve a maid." The fairy heard her, and the fairy said, "Little old lady, tonight before you go to bed, turn around 3 times and see what you will see." So that night, the old lady put on her gown, put on her nightcap, and she turned around. Help me do this. She turned around once, twice, 3 times, and she hopped into bed. Well, the next day when she got up, she looked around, and oh my goodness, she was in a 2-story house, and there was a maid at the end of the bed holding a tray with a teapot and a cup of tea. She jumped up and she looked out, and she was close to town. There were people walking to and from the market. But that old lady didn't thank the fairy. And so the fairy left town. She went to the east, and she went to the west, and she went to the north, and she went to the south. And she stayed away for quite a while. She thought about that little old lady, and she thought, surely she's happy. She said she lives in a really nice 2-story house, and so the fairy came back to town. She came to that little old lady's house, and when she got by the window, she heard the little old lady. "I don't know why I'm living in this house. I'm in town, and it's just a mess. I'd like to have a great big house. I'd like to be right in the center of town, not at the edge of town. And I deserve lots of servants, and I would love to have a carriage to take me for a ride now and then." So the fairy said, "Well, before you go to bed tonight, if you'll turn around 3 times, you'll see what you will see." So the old lady put on her long gown, put on her nightcap. She went to bed, and she turned around once, twice, 3 times, and she hopped into bed. Well, the next day when she woke up, there were servants all around. They were waiting to do anything she wanted them to do. She jumped up and she looked around. She was in a big white house. It had steps across the front and a long sidewalk up to the front. And in the drive was a carriage with 2 white horses. 2 white horses that could take her anywhere she wanted to go. She was really happy. But she never said thank you to the fairy. And so the fairy left town. And the fairy went east, and the fairy went west, and the fairy went north, and the fairy went south. And the fairy stayed away for a while. When the fairy came back to town, she had kind of forgotten about the old lady, but she ventured right into town, and she heard this old lady grumbling. She stopped, and she listened. I don't know why in the world I'm in the middle of town. I deserve better than this. These servants are so lazy. I should be able to live in a castle with red carpet and beautiful curtains and people to wait on me, and I would love to be queen of the land. The fairy said to the old woman, well, listen, girl. Tonight before you go to bed, you turn around 3 times, and tomorrow you'll see what you will see. So the old lady went to bed that night after she put on her gown and put on her cap, and she turned around once, twice, 3 times. But when she woke up in the morning, she couldn't believe her eyes. The carpet on the floor was red. The curtains were beautiful floral curtains. And there was a big throne at the end of her room, and next to the throne was a crown. She jumped up and she went and sat on the throne, and she put the crown on her head. The old woman was happy. But she never said thank you to this fairy. And so the fairy left town, and the fairy went east, and the fairy went west, and the fairy went north, and the fairy went south, and the fairy stayed away. The fairy stayed away for a very long time because she thought now this old lady had to be very happy. She was queen of the land. And then one day the fairy came back to town, and this is what she heard. Well, I'm just tired of living here. I'd sure like to move somewhere else. I'd just like to pick up everything, and I would like to be queen of the universe. That's what I'd like to be. The fairy looked at the old lady, and she said, well, girl, before you go to bed tonight, turn around 3 times, and tomorrow you'll see what you will see. So that night again, the old lady put on her gown, put on her nightcap, and she turned around once, twice, 3 times, and she hopped into bed. She never did say thank you to that fairy, you know. And so the next day, this is what you heard. Because the old lady was back in the vinegar bottle, and the cork was in tight. And that's the